Okay, what's up everybody? Roku here, back with some more League of Legends content, and today I've got a video that takes a bit of effort for you guys, a nice video. This video is my best top laner champions for solo queue. It's a tier list of all the champions that I think are great for solo queue or bad for solo queue. I'll just list them all in this tier list and explain to you guys how well they are to main or to having your champion pool. So if you're a person who's new to the game and needs to form a champion pool, or you're an experienced person who needs to reform the champion pool, this should be the perfect video for you. And also, if you just want more content from Roku TV, this video should also be very nice for you as well, alright? I split up the tier list into a bunch of levels, and I've kind of wrote some things that kind of explain the levels themselves, but I'm going to go through the tier list and explain like the levels before I get into like putting the champions in there, right? So the lowest tier list I have here is not top laners, because basically, if you guys, some of you might notice, this tier list is for patch 10.24, so some things like Kalista Top were popular back then, but not really anymore. So there are some picks in here that the guy who made the tier list left in who are not top laners, who are just going to go here. Autofill. Now, autofill is basically like, I'll put the champions in here who are great if you A, are autofilled, or B, if you're a one trick and your one trick is banned. These are the champions who are very, very simple, and they do very well, but you don't really get that much out of maining them. You know, like it's an autofill champion. You're not gonna get much more from maining them, right? You're not gonna get that much more from like having them in your champion pool. They're just there, and if you have nothing else to pick, they're good picks. Great as one trick. These are the champions who are essentially A tier or B tier-ish, high B tier, A tier, if the person playing them puts in enough time to playing them. And the amount of time it takes to play these one-trick champions basically means that, like it takes so much time that you better just be playing that one champion or you're not going to be able to perform at your highest level, right? D tier, waste of time. These are the champions where like you really should not be playing them or having them in your champion pool. C tier is basically champions that are like, they're barely playable, right? And this can be due to a multitude of reasons, right? One, they're too easy to counterplay, so basically, if you go to a higher elo, they're unplayable. Two, they're only good at a specific rank, which is basically what I just said, but it's like, you know, some picks are only good at a high elo, for example, because of the follow-up and etc. Or, like, the last but not least, it's good as a counter pick, right? If some of the more meta champions are picked, you can pick one of these guys as a counter pick, but that's just it, you know? It's kind of like when Nautilus was meta, Morgana was a great pick simply because she countered Nautilus, you know? It's kind of like that, you know? So picks that only survive by countering the bigger picks. B tier are champions who are perfectly fine to play, and some of the champions in here take either too much effort or are just like not that good or are too team reliant. A tier champions are very, very solid solo queue champions, work in a lot of situations with a lot of team comps, and they do their job fine. And S tier solo queue champions are your ideal solo queue champions, right? If you main these guys or if you one trick these guys, you're gonna have an amazing time. And these champions are basically the best solo queue champions in my opinion, basically, right? So yeah, that is the explanation of the tier list. Like, comment, and subscribe more amazing League of Legends content. My Wild Rift guide is coming out soon. I just set up my, phone so that I can record it properly. And yeah, I'm going to get some gameplay in and edit that video out. So yeah, be sure to keep an eye out for that video. So subscribe, click that notification bell, all that good stuff. So yeah, let's get right into it. Our first champion, Aatrox, is actually an A tier. Aatrox is a very, very good solo queue champion, and the only reason he's not S tier is because he's actually kind of hard to play, right? Though a lot of top players do play Aatrox, he is a little bit hard to play because landing all your Qs, landing on your combos, landing everything takes a lot of practice and a lot of knowledge to do, right? He's not a one-trick level champion, but he is a difficult champion to play at the optimal level. But if you do play him at the optimal level, he is an amazing champion for solo queue. He is great in lane against a lot of picks. He has a very strong team fight, right? Team fighting as Aatrox is very, very powerful, so long as you don't go to late game, of course. And he can work all very well with solo queue teammates in higher elos, right? So though in some lower elos you might have some difficulty with him, let's just say like diamond and above, Aatrox is an amazing champion, right? And honestly, I'm not gonna go into this much detail with the other champions, but I kind of hate that there's this myth that Aatrox is this unplayable dogshit champion when that's not the truth. I know exactly who's like responsible for spreading this myth. I'm not gonna name them, but this champion is not a bad champion at all. The new season has done nothing but help him out greatly, and Aatrox is an amazing champion to play in Season 11. Next, Akali. Akali, I would say, is a B-tier champion. One, because she takes way too much effort to play, right? And two, she's not that strong until level 6, right? A lot of the bruisers and champions in top lane are very, very tough and are hard to take down before level 6, right? And with all these bruisers, fighters, and these champions who are powerful pre-6, Akali can't really do that much, right? And this becomes even worse in higher elos, because if there's an opportunity, or like a case where there's a fight in the river, or a jungle, where both top laners have to rotate, Akali will be less useful than her opposing top laner in most cases, right? Compare her to like a Darius, right? Who's going to be more useful in a river fight? Of course the Darius, or the Renekton, or the Aatrox, whichever one, right? Akali is not that strong pre-6, which is what kind of holds her back. But her ultimate gives her a lot of all-inning power, a lot of rotating power, and overall, she's not a bad pick. It's just that she can't do too much compared to other great solo queue picks early on. Camille. Camille is the single best top laner in the game right now, and she has been the best top laner in the game for like half a year, right? It's actually disgusting how long she's been the best top laner for. And worst of all, right, the worst of all is that I've seen the nerfs that Mark Yetter is like doing to her, right, on Twitter, etc. And the issue is that the W nerfs don't do anything to nerf Camille's kit. They're not nerfing her shield. They're not nerfing her Q. It's very obvious that someone at Riot loves this champion or something, but it's actually so disgusting that this champion is overpowered. And with how incompetent Riot is at nerfing her, I would say that, like, if you want elo right now, play Camille, main her, and learn her ASAP, because this champion is broken. Absolutely. And the higher up you go in elo, the more broken she becomes. So learn how to abuse the champion if you want free elo. But, you know, if you're just playing for fun or whatever, you know, maybe don't play her, but like, yeah, she's too broken, and Riot are not going to nerf her. So yeah, she's S tier. The next champion we have is Chogath. Chogath is a very, very good solo queue top laner, because he's basically the only tank in the game. Not the only tank. He's one of like the 2-3 tanks who functions as a very powerful top laner, right? If you actually look at this tier list after it's done, you'll notice that top laners and ranged top laners don't land up very high, because they're not good at carrying games, or, you know, they're basically just there to cheese lane and to team slave, right? A lot of these tanks. So, like, ranged tops and tanks are not going to do too well on this list. But Chogath, if you actually have enough skill on him, he's actually A tier. It's just that he's one of the more difficult top laners to play, one of the more difficult tanks, to play, because of like all the skill shots. And a Chogath that can land skill shots is very, very frightening, right? He can go AP and tank if depending on whether he has to solo carry the game or not. So he has some variety in his build too. So overall, he's one of the better tanks in the game. Darius or Darius, whatever, the big boy himself, goes to S tier. Darius is an amazing, amazing, amazing champion for solo queue, and he will always be an amazing champion for solo queue because of how he works, right? He is a juggernaut who, if the enemy messes up, he can basically kill them. He scales harder when the enemy makes more mistakes. So for 99% of you guys, Darius is gonna be like the best champion to main, right? Because I know he gets banned a lot in Platinum, Golden, etc. But the main thing is, at those ranks, no one knows how to play against Darius. No one. And this basically lets you pull off the most like crazy, insane kills that would never work. Because people don't know how to kite, people don't know how it works, and people walk into a 5-stack Darius. So Darius is a very, very great champion for a solo queue. Very strong, and has a lot of carry potential. Now, if you get into Grandmaster, Challenger, or even like High Master-ish, he kind of drops to A tier. Because like at those elos, pretty much everyone knows what Darius does, and he's basically worthless without Ghost and Flash. But for most of you guys, he's S tier, so I'm going to put him in S tier where he belongs. Mundo. Mundo is a waste of time in the current meta, right? Don't get mad. I mean, I'm not even like I'm not even worried if anybody's gonna get mad because they're like 2 Mundo players in the world right now. But basically speaking, Mundo is very, very dated in terms of a top lane champion. He has no CC. His damage and tankiness are only threatening if he's fed, right? And the only thing he does is basically he's hard to kill, right? He's just hard to kill. That's it, right? And if he doesn't have CC and not that much damage when he's fed, you kind of understand that like he's basically not going to do too much in this meta. Not to mention how he doesn't have that many great matchups in the game. A lot of the matchups for Mundo essentially boil down to him standing like near his turret and just throwing hatches to farm. That's basically all Mundo matchups. So I would say this champion is a waste of time to play. Not to mention how he's about to get reworked. So whatever you learn from him right now is basically going to be a waste of time because you're going to have to relearn it when he's reworked anyway. Our next champion, Fiora. Fiora is a very, very good like solo queue champion. She's good at all elos. It's just that she takes an insane amount of mechanical skill to play, right? She's basically S tier, but because of how much skill she requires to play, I'm going to put her at A tier. I know we're supposed to like hate on Fiora, and I know that Fiora is annoying or whatever, but we can't be delusional, guys. Fiora is a very strong solo queue champion because she has a lot of great matchups. She can deal with tanks pretty well. She's a skill matchup into pretty much every single bruiser and juggernaut. If you're good enough, you can beat all of them. She's one of the few champions in the game, like Fiora, like Camille, and etc., who can split push properly, which makes her a very strong solo queue pick. She's just a little bit worse in team fights, but if you're playing her properly, you should be so fed that like you're basically like an ADC for your team, just dealing the damage that your team needs to win the game, right? She is, like I said, you know, she is kind of bad in team fights, which basically makes it so that she can't advance to S tier. And what like her team fight strength and the amount of skill she needs, combined with a few other factors, like you can just build Ramber and counter her. Things like these kind of keep her down in A tier, but she's a very, very nice solo queue champion. Nice for the person playing them, not the people playing against them. Gangplank. Gangplank is worthless at lower elos to play, right? And honestly, the only reason I have him at like C tier is because he's basically like... Okay, I don't know how I say this, but there are 2 types of Gangplanks, right? Grasp Q spam top lane Gangplanks, and the Gangplanks who actually know how to play Gangplank. These guys are B tier at max, but the amount of skill it takes to play Gangplank properly like that is insane. So none of the current Gangplank players actually do that. Most Gangplank players play him like a cheesy grass Q top laner who just basically wins level 1, 2, 3 because he has a functioning Q key, right? That's basically all Gangplank players right now. And it's disgusting, but Riot won't nerf Grasp, so that's basically what this champion has become to. It's the champion that you pick so that you get carried, basically. And he's pretty okay to play in higher elos because the person playing him is going to play him nice, safely, not die, and just Q spam, get farm. But like, and in lower elos, he's kind of bad, but I would not recommend you main this champion at all. Unless you already have like 1,000 hours on him, then yeah, play him. He's a decent B tier champion, but he's not a good champion to main because of like Grasp, right? Because Grasp is so strong, Riot can't buff Gangplank, because if they do, then he's going to be overpowered, right? So they have to basically nerf Grasp or nerf Gangplank's usage of Grasp and then buff him. Then he'll be a decent B tier pick. It just takes a lot of skill. But now he's stuck at C tier because Riot won't nerf Grasp. And yeah, you can tell there's a lot of hatred for Riot in this tier list. Okay, it's been 15 minutes, so I'm gonna basically hurry up with this. Garen. Garen is a very nice B tier champion. He is basically very good at most elos, but once you get to Diamond, maining Garen is a very bad idea because he's a very simple champion, right? There's no outplaying you can do, there's no plays you can make, he's just there. And if the enemy messes up, then he does his thing, but if the enemy doesn't mess up, then he can't do anything, right? He's basically a champion that you play where you're wasting your effectiveness is dependent on the enemy team. Darius is also kind of like that, but Ghost, Strikebreaker, and Flash basically make it so that you can make a lot of plays on Darius with Q, R, and what's that, etc. Garen is basically a worse version of Darius, except he is way simpler to play and takes significantly less skills. So, and he's not that good at high elo. So, honestly, he's great to learn top lane with, but he's not that good into high elos. So I would learn top lane and then just drop this champion for superior champions. Gnar. Gnar is honestly one of the like okay-ish tanks to play because he's range. He's basically a ranged top laner. He's just a tank in certain situations. It's just that like there's a lot of champions in the game who do what he does better than him. He's not hyper good at one thing. He's just okay at a lot of things. So having him in your champion pool is okay, but the kind of aids part with him is that he does take a level of skill to play too. So like the amount of skill it takes to play him plus everything else, honestly, it makes him C tier. Because like he's not the best at some things, and he takes a lot of teamwork to use properly, right? If you're in high diamond, master, grandmaster, etc., he's basically B tier champion. Very nice to have your champion pool as a pocket pick. But for most of you guys, he's basically a C tier. Hecarim. I'm not sure where this. Okay, I'm just gonna put him in not top laners because he's not even a top laner. Heimer. He's basically a ranged top laner you pick to cheese lane. He has a lot of great matchups because of how his turrets work, but he's way better in mid lane because basically getting prio in top lane only gives you like power in like a single portion of the map. Whereas in mid lane, if you have prio as Heimer, you basically have access to both rivers, right? So Heimer is better used in mid lane. And the worst part is because of how much damage there is in the game, any single champion can one-shot Heimer. So if you make a single mistake and get caught, you're gonna die instantly, right? This may not be important in 1v1s because you're just zoning them with your turrets, but when the jungler comes in, you're just dead, guaranteed, so long as the enemy kind of juggle aggro of the turrets properly and fight you properly, right? So yeah, Heimer is basically just there as a cheese counter pick. Illahi. Illahi is at best a B tier champion because basically the same reason as Garen, she's a worse version of Darius. She's a very big, in fact, she's the biggest mistake punishing champion in the game, right? Even more so than Darius. If people step into her, get their ghost taken by her, she can just basically one-shot them and keep going in the fight because every single tentacle is going to give her 5% healing. But that's just it, right? If she's picked against a certain team comp that has good mobility or good displacement, then she's basically worthless, right? She ults, then Gragas ults her, and she's basically worthless, right? Or Lee Sin kicks her away, or Janna, or whatever, right? There's a lot of champions who can basically just, like, zone her out and make her worthless. And on top of that, the basic difference between her and Darius is that Darius, when someone makes a mistake, the power goes to him. So wherever he travels, the power stays with him. With Illahi, that power of her ultimate is limited to an area, right? So as long as people are being aware of this area or not fighting in the area or away from her tentacles, then she's worthless, right? So she's basically just good at cheesing kills in lane, and she's good into some team comps. But she's kind of a very one-dimensional champion, so it's like she's a bit of an upgraded version of Garen, right? She's kind of a mix between Garen and Darius. So she's not a worse champion. She's pretty okay, but I just don't see her that much in high elo. And if I do, it's like it's just sad, honestly, how worthless that champion is against like proper teams. Next, Irelia. Irelia is an A tier champion because like laning with her is kind of easy, right? Like having good CS with her, laning with her, and all-inning with her once you learn a champion is actually kind of easy. People look at all these like, you know, clips of Irelia getting kills in these 1v1s. They're like, oh my god, how did she do that? That's what the champion is supposed to be, right? In my opinion, Irelia is a very strong laner, but a slightly weaker team fighter, right? Because if you lock her down, you just one-shot her and she's dead, right? But in a 1v1, you can't lock her down because it's just you, right? So she just basically gets off her R and E and just one-shots you, right? And her, effectiveness scales with how many enemy minions there are. So laning with Irelia is basically extremely easy to do. You'll never fall behind in CS because of how your Q works. And there's a lot of things that make her a very strong champion. What makes it so that she isn't S tier is 1, she's a bit hard to play. 2, she has a few she has a lot of matchups. Like a lot of these bruisers can kind of mess her up seriously, right? Fiora, Darius, etc. So she's kind of struggling in some of these matchups. And also she takes a lot of teamwork to play, right? You're relying on your team a lot. So if you're lower elo, she's between A and B tier, and if you're in higher elo, she's between A and S tier. But she's quite a strong champion for top lane, right? It's just that if in solo queue, if you're stuck versus one of her counter picks, you're just done for, right? That guy is gonna mess you up and make you worthless. But aside from that, she's pretty okay. Jax is a very, very strong champion. He is the typical top laner that you can think of. Very, the only thing holding him back is that you have to learn him a lot, right? But if you learn the basics on him and learn the matchups, he is a monster to play. Great split push, great flanking if he flanks in a team fight. His 1v1 potential isn't so great until he gets his items. Until he gets one item, he's basically not that strong. But with one-trick knowledge, you can kind of make up for that, right? He's a very strong champion in solo queue and great to learn. Next, Jace, our first one-trick champion. We love to hate on Jace, but Jace is a very high skill ceiling champion. And if you don't play him perfectly, you're not going to be doing that well on him. So to be honest, if you're not want to kick Jace, it's not worth it. But if you do want to kick him, he's a solid A2 champion because he's got all you need. He's got a lot of team fighting power, a lot of damage, a lot of range damage, great all-ending power, a lot of skill, a lot of outplay potential. He's a very, very good champion. It's just that you have to one-trick him so that you don't get behind, because if you're behind as Jace, you're basically just worthless, right? Our next champion, Kalista, not a top laner. Karma, see, all she basically does is annoy the enemy top laner. If she can successfully tilt her opposing top laner, she's done her job. But if her opposing top laner has any patience, she's basically worthless, right? The only thing Karma does is essentially team slave, basically. And she's only strong right now because of Moonstone, Staff of Flowing Water. She's only strong right now because of the current enchanter meta, but I believe this will be nerfed, and I want this tier list to be good for a lot of patches. So yeah, after these Moonstone whatever is nerfed, she's just gonna be an S tier pick, there to basically just be annoying, right? Just good as a counter pick. Kayle. I'll put Kayle as a C tier because she's very, very weak early on. Pre-6 and even post-6, she's not even that good. Because, in solo queue, you need to be strong. Not super strong early, like an Olaf, but you have to have some strength so that you can do stuff pre-6, right? You can't do that with Kayle, right? She's not strong pre-6. She basically loses every matchup without her ultimate. And even with her ultimate, there's a lot of cases where she can be beaten, right? She can't do that much in jungle fights or whatever because she's melee until level 6. And this basically makes the champion very bad in 99.9% of elos. The only elo I would recommend her is basically Challenger and GM, right? Because at those elos, she people, your team kind of understands your weaknesses and can support you, and then you're basically can beat your champion. But beyond that, she's not very strong or useful. Kennen, waste of time. Kennen is basically one of the worst range top laners you can play because he doesn't even have that good of damage, right? His all-in potential is horrible. His damage is very low. He just doesn't do that much, and there's so many range top laners who just do his job better than him. His win condition is basically getting to mid-late game where he can basically build Zhonya's, a bunch of AP, ult into the enemy team, and stun them all. But, doing that is just not worth it because the other weakness of this champion, he takes skill to play, right? It takes skill to play Kennen properly. So it's just a waste of time because you're putting too much effort into not that much return. So Kennen is just not worth it to main as a top laner. Kled, S tier. Not a lot of people would agree with me, they'll put him A tier, but I think Kled is an S tier champion. Kled one tricks and people who are skilled with Kled are generally monsters in solo queue. They can, like, you get kills in lane, you get your damage, you can roam with R. It's like when you lose lane to some of these champions, you lose lane. When you lose lane to Kled, he basically has access to the entire map with his ultimate. So a good Kled one trick or a good Kled main can be a devastating like solo queue like player, right? So that is why I think Kled is an S tier solo queue champion, really, really strong. He's almost one tricky, but like these one tricks are, if you one trick him, you're A tier, but he is S tier if you play him to his like absolute, if you play him to his absolute limit, right? So he's very, very strong. Malphite autofill champion. Right now he's basically broken, right? He's broken right now, but like once he gets nerfed, he'll basically return to what he was always. He's an autofill champion. Right now he's right here, right? He's basically after Camille. He's the second best top laner right now. But once they nerf him, he's basically just gonna be autofilled here, and it's basically self-explanatory. He has a bunch of good matchups. He can play very safe. His ult means that he's useful no matter what happens. He's basically there to fill in spots when you don't know any other champion to play. Maokai is pretty much the same in that, like, Maokai is slower than Malphite, right? It takes a bit more skill to play Malphite. I mean, it takes a bit more skill to play Maokai. Because he's slower, you need to use your skills better. But he can also do a bit more than Malphite. He takes a bit more skill, he can do a bit more, but they're basically the same, you know, autofill champions who you're not really getting that much out of maining them. Wukong, S tier. Wukong is a great champion because he has a lot of good matchups into some of these like champions, right? His 1 to 5, he's kind of okay. With Ignite, he's a threat. Without Ignite, he's okay. But level 6, his all-in power is so strong, right? And he's amazing in team fights, and he actually scales up to be very, very strong mid-late games. So he's a very decent champion. A lot of good matchups into some of these other champions. And yeah, he's pretty good in solo queue. Mordekaiser, I'd put him as B tier actually, but just the bottom of B tier, almost C tier, because he's not as like skill cap. Like Mordekaiser's usage, basically, like he's basically useless until he gets to like 1-2 items, right? He's not that useful without his items, and unlike Jax, he can't get those items himself, right? You rely on the enemy laner to screw up, and if they don't screw up, like you can't be the aggressor, right? With Jax, you can be the aggressor and do stuff, not with Mordekaiser. Mordekaiser is very strong because your ultimate makes you one of like the few top laner champions, like even if top lane is irrelevant, you can be useful with your ultimate, but like honestly, he's just an okay champion to play in solo queue. He's not as good as these other solo queue picks. Nasus, waste of time. This champion is like outside of platinum, right? That's the highest you'll get good results with Nasus. He is just worthless. Nothing you can do with him. He's too easy to play around. He has no mobility. His damage is limited in his melee range, which sucks because like in higher elos, which are very team reliant, and right now it's like a bot lane meta, he just gets locked down and one shot. So that just makes it like hell for him. Not to mention how a lot of these champions just destroy him, right? He doesn't have like good matchups in a lot of cases, right? He can't do that much early. He can't do that much in team fights. He's good at split pushing, but unlike other good split pushers, he is very immobile, so the enemy team can easily just catch him and destroy him. So I would say he's a waste of time to play. And if you're a lower elo player playing Nasus, then I mean, even if you're a higher elo player playing Nasus, then I guess, you know, you do you. But if you have the opportunity to play any other one of these champions than him, then just drop him. Not these ones. If you have any one of the SAB2 champions, then play them instead of him, right? Not that much use. And if you rely on him in earlier elos, then you're not gonna have a good time in high elo. NiKo, annoying contra pick. Not that much you can do with her, not a lot of carry potential. She's just there to annoy the enemy team, like Karma. She's got a bit more damage and like can do a bit more by herself like Karma, but she actually does lose in a lot of cases against some of these champions once they scale up and etc. She can be like outplayed very easily, and honestly, she's just an annoying range top laner. She's not even the best range top laner, and she's only good in certain matchups. Olaf is honestly, I would say a B tier. and purely because of his early game strength. If it wasn't for his early game strength and his ability to cheese a lot of like kills here, he wouldn't be here because like he's a very kill reliant champion. If you're not fed on Olaf, then you're worthless, right? And he has the means to get fed, but you pretty much have to play him too much to like get like to know when you can all in people and kill people. And some of these matchups do beat him. So like that's why you need some one trick knowledge on Olaf. He's not too good, and he's basically C tier, but because he's has the things that top laners like, which is early game power, ability to make plays on top lane, and very good matchups, he's B tier. Ornn. Ornn is basically one of the other good tanks. He's probably the second hardest to play tank in the game. Actually, the third, because one of the tanks is not even going to counter as a tank. He's basically the third hardest tank to play. Second is Chogath. He can do a lot, though he is way more effective in higher elos, right? In like high elo, he's very good, but in lower elo, he's not that good. He's not that good as he could be. He's still a very solid tank. He can lane very, very well. He has a lot of good laning. And once he wins lane and gets a bit fed, he does a ton of damage and becomes unkillable. So he's a very nice champion. And honestly, I'll just put Volibear right next to him. Volibear is basically the same case as Ornn, right? Except Volibear is a bit more independent and does more damage, right? So he is more team reliant, so better for high elo, whereas he's better for pretty much lower elos, right? Because he does a ton of damage, and in lower elos, people won't know how to play against Volibear, so he's a very good tank to play. Pantheon. I'm going to put Pantheon on B tier because he's got a bunch of good matchups. Though he does start losing level 6, his strength isn't holding down a lane. His strength is winning lane and making plays around the map. Pantheon is very, very good at winning lane and taking control of the game through fights in the jungle, fights in mid lane, fights in the the river, everywhere, right? So with Pantheon, this is the old picture by the way, but like you win lane and then you destroy the rest of the map before your enemy top laner can scale up, right? He's a very good roamer champion. Poppy, she's great as a one trick, but not that great as like any other way, right? The reason I don't name her as a tank is because she kind of plays like a juggernaut or a bruiser, right? She does a ton of damage, right, when she gets fed, but she doesn't have the normal tank things like a lot of CCN, etc., right? She's basically only good into certain lanes and certain team compositions, right? Her effectiveness basically entirely relies on the enemy team composition and your team composition. So if you pick her into the right team comp, she can be like an AS tier, but like in some comps, it's just sad how useless she is. So like I'm not gonna put her here either. And she also takes a lot of knowledge to play properly. So honestly, a good one trick playing her will get B tier at best, right? Whereas the Jace can get A or whatever, she can't. So she's basically one of the worst champions to not worst, but one of the worst-ish one-trick champions, but she's still pretty good in most elos. Once she gets fed, she's actually a nightmare to deal with. She can dive so easily, and she's very, very strong until like mid-late game-ish. Quinn. She's basically like Pantheon, except instead of being strong on all-ins, she's a way better roamer, right? So if you're a guy who basically wants to fight less and just roam more and carry your team more, then Quinn is your go-to. She's until level 6 with Ignite, she's very strong in lane, but her Quinn, like her ultimate roaming, makes her so strong as a roamer champion that you can basically roam mid, you can be in every single fight on the map and still come back top lane in time so that you don't miss that much CS. So she's a very, very powerful champion, and honestly, she's the best ranged top laner to play in solo queue. Renekton, solid A tier champion. Renekton is basically, you guys know the drill. He's strong early game with Ignite especially. You can do a lot with him. Thanks to Gore Drinker, he's very, very strong in team fights. And I think the best part about Renekton is his consistency. Unlike a Darius or like a Kled or something, you know, those champions are amazing in some situations, but kind of bad in some. Renekton is always okay, right? He's always good, right? Because his stun is point and click, which is reliable, can't be counterplayed, etc. His Q is easy to land, and he's basically very good mobility, which makes him a threat to the backline. So he's a very good champion, a very consistent champion, and the skill with him is knowing your matchups and knowing to play around your own fury, right? Those are the two skillful parts of him. And once you get those things down, they're not too complicated. He's a very, very solid champion to have in your champion pool. Rengar. Rengar is actually an insanely powerful champion in the right hands. The amount of versatility in his build, the amount of things he can do in lane, the amount of counterplaying, the amount of roaming, etc., 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 makes this champion an insanely strong champion given the right player, right? Now, Rengar is an A-tier champion if the right player is playing him. But most players are going to be B or C tier because it takes an insanely high amount of skill to play Rengar, right? It takes so much skill. More so than basically any of these other champions to master this one champion. But if you master him, you're going to be insane. And if you're a Rengar jungle player, don't think that it's the same as Rengar top. Rengar top is an entirely different beast. Rengar top is a bruiser, whereas Rengar jungle is more of like an ADC assassin one-shot, right? He's a one-shot champion, whereas Rengar top lane is basically like a fighter, a bruiser, a juggernaut. And the thing is, his build can be flexed into so many different like types that you can do a lot with this champion, right? The skill cap for this champion is insanely high, and honestly, a good Rengar is very respected. But the amount of work and knowledge it takes to play this champion well basically keeps him down, right? Like, I love this champion, but I just don't have the time to play him, otherwise I would. Riven, kind of the same case as Rengar, right? Very, very powerful if you put in the right amount of time, but honestly, she's basically A tier at best. She's not S tier. Now, let me explain this one thing, right? In an elo, super high elo, when people know how to effectively play against Riven, she kind of starts suffering, right? And the only reason why, like, Riven is seen as this, like, you know, a lot of players think she's the best champion in the game if she's one-tricked, which is not true. And this myth is only propagated because of NA, right? In NA, there are a lot of good Riven one-tricks, right? And these one-tricks can be very, very high challenger, but in my opinion, that's only because they're playing in NA. Right? No offense to any NA people watching the video or something, but your region allows for some stupid things to survive way longer than they should, right? So I guess she's S tier in some of the lesser regions, but in any proper region, she's basically A tier, right? She's not a bad champion at all. She's a very powerful champion. Takes a lot of skill to play, but very good in a lot of circumstances. A very roamy, lots of mobility, which is very good because she snowballs super hard. It's just that she's not as strong as she is in super high elo when she's against competent people. Rumble. Rumble is a very, like, underestimated champion, right? If you one-trick Rumble, right, like, in lower elos, he's basically a C tier, right? Because in lower elos, it's kind of hard to play him, but in high elo, he's basically S tier, right? SA tier. A one-trick Rumble is devastating to play against. He's very good at laning in some matchups, right? He can dominate some lanes. All in, kill them, whatever, get fed. In bad matchups, he can just play safe. He has all the tools to play safe. His roaming, his fights earlier on is very strong. And once he gets his ultimate, it's just an insane ability that basically defines teamfights. Right? It's a game-changing ability if he uses it properly, right? Rumble is a very, very strong champion, but I wouldn't recommend him to a player who's learning the game newly, because you have to be good at the game already to play him to his like absolute strength, right? You not only need to know the matchups and how he works, but you also have to know how the enemy champions work, all of them that you're up against. You have to understand how the game works, how to roam, how to manipulate minion wave. It takes a lot of knowledge to play Rumble, but if you have that knowledge, he's a very, very powerful champion. Ryze, honestly, a waste of time. He's basically like, it's like Rumble, but worse at almost everything else except for late game strength, right? This champion is so horrible in like outside of Challenger and high GM, maybe. Right? I just don't see anyone doing that much with this champion, so just stay away from him. He's like, do they even have to say anything? It's just horrible. Sett, okay, a better champion, A tier. Sett's a great champion. He's basically like one of the other juggernauts, but instead of being kill based, he is more team based, right? He's way stronger in team fights and fights that include multiple opponents. And unlike some other team based champions, he is very strong on his own as well, right? He's very hard to beat, especially once he gets Borg and some of these other items. So overall, Sett is a very, very strong champion to play. He is a bit like tame, meaning that he's kind of like Renekton in that he can't be crazy powerful, right? There's not that much you can do. Like, you know how it's like, I use Darius as an example, but basically Darius is like, the best you can do with Darius is kill an entire team. You can kill an entire team with Darius. You can't do crazy stuff like that with Sett, right? He's a bit more, his potential is a bit less, but his like, uselessness is a bit higher too, meaning that at worst, he's still going to be useful for his team, but at best, he's going to be a team fighting monster. With his ultimate, his E, his damage with his auto attacks, he gets 2 times the auto attacks all the other champions get, and his W is a fight changer, right? You can flash with his W to get your 1002 damage off on a squishy target. It's insane what you can do with this champion. Though he's not as good as some of the other champions, he's still a very, very powerful pick. Shen. Shen is... like, I hate to have this champion in my screen, but Shen is basically one of like the best top laners in the game, purely because you can basically pick this champion and team slave your team, right? And he's basically one of the only champions in the game, in the top lane, who can impact the rest of the map with like very high effectiveness, right? If you get TP and his ultimate on Shen, you can basically roam very well on him, right? You can roam, you can teleport mid, teleport bot lane, and basically change fights down there, anywhere in the map, and like help your team way more than these other champions. And because of how kind of like useless-ish top lane is, top lane is not worthless, by the way. Top lane is strong, but it's just not as useful as some of the other roles. Because of this, helping the other lanes as Shen is very, very strong. Because let's say you have an ADC player who's very good at the game. If you pick Shen and perma camp this ADC, make sure they get fed, then you basically win the game because it's a bot lane meta, right? So Shen is very, very nice. And I actually do know people who do that. Like they OPGG their ADCs or whatever, and they're okay, this guy can carry, I'm gonna pick Shen and keep ulting him so that I get carried by this guy. I know people who do that and people who actually do succeed doing that. So yeah, Shen is a very nice champion to play in solo queue. It's just that the only thing that's like holding him back is that you have to play him well, right? He has a lot of power in lane, but all that takes a bit of skill to play. And if you can't lane properly with him, you're basically losing resources by ulting, etc., right? You're basically you're doing well, but not as well as you can. So once you learn how to play Shen into the matchups, how to play the lane, etc., he's a very strong champion. Singed. He's honestly just a one-trick champion. I can't really tell too much with him because he's like, okay, if you're a lower elo player, stay away from this guy because learning how to play the game through Singed is gonna cripple your learning of the game, right? He is gonna cripple your learning of the game because he interacts with the game differently than all other champions. Once you get okay at the game and you have a decent understanding, you can play Singed and you can do decently well with him, but only as a one trick, right? That's why he's in this limbo, in my opinion, where if you one trick him as a lower elo player, it's gonna be so difficult for you to play any other champion, right? Anything else. So I'm just saying that don't one trick him as a lower elo player because you're basically not going to be able to play anything else at all. But if you're a higher elo champion, you're better off just playing a few of these other champions, like, pick up a Wukong, a Shen, or like, a Sett or a Renekton, like 3 champions, and boom, perfect, like, champion pool. Don't even bother with Singed. But I have seen people make him work in super high elo. It's just that, like, I just wouldn't recommend people play him at all. Right? It's just, I know most of you guys are going to be like lower elo players. Stay away from this champion because he's going to cripple your development as a player. Sion. Sion is probably the only tank in the game who is S tier. Right? Sion is a very, not always S tier because in lower elos he's kind of a bit worse. but Sion is an insanely hard champion to play at the highest level. But once you do, he becomes very, very strong, because it's not the champion itself that's like hard. It's how this champion interacts with the rest of the game that you have to learn, right? How to combo your stuff, how much damage you do, how much damage the enemy does, how much you can tank with your W, how much you can slow them down with your E to land the Q, etc, 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 etc. There's so many levels to this champion, but like, he's the only tank I've seen, or one of the only champs I've seen one-tricked to like top 10 challenger consistently. Right? There has to be something going on. And Sion is an insanely skillful champion. I respect a good Sion player. I just don't see him because I play Darius and they never pick Sion into Darius because Darius basically destroys a Sion. But whatever, right? Sion is a very hard champion, but because he's so difficult to play, I would say just stick to the other tanks, because he is the hardest tank to play. And he can be built as a damage dealer. He can be built AD, but whatever, right? He's only good as a one-trick, basically, right? And these guys, these Sion one-tricks are fucking crazy. Salas, I don't know. He's basically a wasted time as a top laner. He just gets destroyed by so many top lane champions that I can't recommend him in good conscience. Teemo, basically C tier, right? Now, there are some Teemo players specifically who know how to play it properly, right? His shroom placement is kind of difficult to do, in a like so difficult that like basically there are like a handful of Teemo players in the world who can play him to his absolute maximum potential. And this is like not just 1%, 1% of 1% of 1% of Teemo players know how to play this champion effectively. This is why I put him as C tier, because most people won't play him properly and won't have the time to play him properly, right? The shroom placement, how to play him in team fights, because, you know, he's just a champion with no mobility and not that much even damage, aside from, like, you know, he's very good at single targets and very good at nullifying single targets, but in team fights he's bad, unless you make good use of his shrooms, and he's basically there to cheese lane, so most players won't make much use of him, but there are some crazy Teemos out there who can take him to B tier, so yeah. Not bad, but hard to play. Tryndamere, though he's kind of bad in this, like, right now he's very bad, right? Not very bad, but, like, he's just horrible in this meta. But Tryndamere is the best top laner to learn top lane with. He's better than Garen, even. Why? Because of this, right? 1, he takes skill to play. 2, he teaches a lot of good stuff about top lane that Garen doesn't, meaning proper wave management, proper CSing, trading. Trading is very important on Tryndamere, and with Garen you can afford to take some bad trades because you can just play back and heal up. Now with Tryndamere, you can't play back, but it's like, you know, Q spamming basically means that if your Q is down, you're not going to win a fight, right? With Garen, it's like, you can just do whatever, right? You don't even need to think that much on this guy. Tryndamere is a very nice champion to get started on top lane with, and the best part about Tryndamere is that he's actually viable in higher elos. So if you're a lower elo player, you want to learn top lane, and you need a champion, start with this guy. Because this guy, you can take him to Challenger, right? You can take this guy to whatever elo you need to take him to, right? He's not going to limit you. It's just going to be you that's limiting you. So this champion is very, very, very nice. It is kind of crippling to main him at, like, you know, Grandmaster-ish or Challenger, because, like, by then you should know other champions, right? But, like, even if you do just main him, it's no issue. You can easily make Challenger with him, given enough time. He's just a very, very nice champion to get started with, and he's very nice in solo queue if you know how to all him in with him, and etc. Urgot, another very, very nice champion in solo queue. I don't think I need to say that much. He has good damage. He can function as a very nice tank. He's very powerful in team fights. It's just that his matchups are a bit worse. He's kind of like Aatrox, but his matchups are a bit worse. But, like, he's a bit less skill reliant than Aatrox, right? He takes way less mechanical skill, so much more players can pull him off. Vayne, C tier. Vayne is just there to... She exists to annoy top laners, and the only reason she even exists here is because she has good matchups with some of these champions, right? If she didn't have good matchups, she'd just be in the shit tier. And the worst part about picking Vayne is that she doesn't even roam that well, right? Unlike Quinn, where she can roam and make up for the fact that you have no frontliner, Vayne can't roam or do anything on the map, right? So if you focus down and just, she's also very susceptible to getting ganked and destroyed. So I would not recommend this champion to main at all, unless you're basically like a filled ADC player and you have to like play top. Victor is not viable in top anymore. Vladimir is basically C tier as well. He's basically a champion to play to get carried because he's very weak early game. And champions that are weak early game generally don't do too well in top lane in solo queue, because in solo queue you have to just grab the game and like as soon as you can and just control it. Because if the longer you're spending not in control of the game, the more time you're giving the enemy to get control of the game. So you have to grab control of the game and own it, control it, decide the game flow, decide the tempo, all that stuff, right? And Vlad just can't do that. I guess he's okay at cheesing a few kills in lane and scaling up to be a monster, but especially in higher elo, that doesn't really happen all that much. So I can't really recommend Vladimir to your average player. Now, I do know some Vladimir one-tricks who can put in some good work because they can cheese kills with Ignite, they can get to the right places, but that's just a good player forcing a bad, he's not a bad champion, but that's a good player forcing this champion to be good. In my opinion, every single Vlad player, if they put the same time they do into Vlad as they do into any other champion, they would be higher ranked than they would be with this guy, right? He's way better in his lower elos, because lower elos, people just int, people don't know how to play, and you can just get fed really easy with Vlad, but in higher elos, he's kind of a bit yikes to play, because people will abuse you if they have good jungle help. He's just weak early game, man. I didn't need to say anything else. Yasuo, great as one trick. He doesn't have a lot of good matchups in top lane. It takes a lot of skill to play him properly. Once you do play him well, he's like a decent B-tier champion, right? It's just so hard to play him properly. And he's one of the champions in the game where the amount of skill it takes to play him is just not worth it when Yone exists, but whatever, right? If you want to force him to be a top laner, you can do it. Yone, I wouldn't say he's great as one trick. He's a C tier because he has a lot of very bad matchups. And unlike Yasuo, if Yasuo is good enough, he can beat some of these champions, but Yone can't, because Yone is basically a stupider version of Yasuo. It's way better, it's way easier to play him, but he's also not that high skill ceiling, right? The maximum you can do in Yone is way lower than the max you can do in Yasuo, so he's basically a low skill version of Yasuo, so he doesn't do that well. Like, you pick Darius into Yone or you pick Renekton, he's just like screwed. Yorick, he's basically a C tier. I call him the Boomer's Bruiser. He's basically the only bruiser in the game who doesn't take that much skill to play, honestly. And like, there's not that much you can do with him because he kind of starts struggling into higher elos. I don't see many Yorick players in higher elo. Like, I straight up, like, let's just say in my entire time as Grandmaster that I was, like, in the whole month or so, in like, and every single time I even in Master, I've played against Yorick like twice, basically, or maybe even one time, because the other one was on my Smurf account when like 2 years ago. I don't even remember. Like, I play against Yorick so like not often, and even when I do, it takes a bunch of knowledge on the Yorick player's part to not die. But it's like, a fed Yorick can be very, like, okay, Yorick gets outscaled in a lot of matchups, and basically the only thing Yorick does is split push, right? You ignore Yorick, and he takes down all your turrets. That's basically it with Yorick, right? He does have some team fighting power, but like, that it's also conditional. It's also reliant on team comps, and he's just not a good high elo champion. I can, like, if you're lower elo, then you can kind of make him work and cheese your way to diamondish, but like, from that point on, you better just drop him and learn one of these more skillful champions, because like I said, he's a Boomer's Bruiser. He basically plays like a tank, but like, bruisers, juggernauts, and fighters are champions who are skill-based, right? Very skill-based, takes a lot of mechanics, and he doesn't take any of that. Like, he's basically just a tank who's in the body of a bruiser. I don't know. I don't want to install Yorick too much. He is a very decent champion. It's just that he kind of suffers against more competent players. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. It's 54 minutes so far. Oh my god, it's so long. I don't think I'm gonna timestamp this. There's like 50 stamps that I'd have to make for this. So, all right, that's pretty much it for this video. I'm just gonna end it off quickly because I am tired and I want to go get food thank you guys very much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, keep that bell notification on, whatever. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.